Turning wrenches into gold on Discovery Channel, they were the masters of bespoke motorcycles. However, the American Chopper stars lost everything when the cameras stopped. Debts in the millions were disclosed in bankruptcy filings. Family members filed lawsuits against one another. After filing a $250,000 lawsuit, one son vanished entirely. While his father threw him out, another battled addiction. The TV-featured mansion went into foreclosure. The corporate empire fell apart. They are now dispersed throughout the nation, and you will be shocked to learn what happened to each of them. Senior Paul Teutul. He used to stand like a king inside Orange County Choppers, shouting commands while constructing dream motorcycles. His voice boomed through the store as his enormous arms were folded and his sunglasses were on. Senior Paul Teutul was more than just a bike builder. He was a brand, a TV personality, and a representation of traditional hardness. Every episode was watched by fans, who cheered as engines roared and tempers flared. Off camera, however, the empire was already collapsing. In February 2018, everything fell apart. He filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, discreetly revealing he owed almost 170,800 ringgit to approximately 50 different creditors. His assets totaled 19,001,729. However, the reality was even harsher. He was making $1570.93 a month, but he needed to spend $12,612 just to make ends meet. Almost little remained. Fans once happily watched him build a mansion in Montgomery, New York, but it was foreclosed upon. He was forced to sell it in 2019 for a pittance of $1.5 million. More than double that was what he desired. Because every penny mattered, farm animals and tools were included in the sale. However, the financial issues weren't the only catastrophe. Thomas Derbyshire, his own business partner, filed a fraud lawsuit against him in 2017. Derbyshire had contributed $3 million to the start of a new program. Paul Sr., nevertheless, persevered. The truth was revealed in court documents. He took a week off from filming to go fishing. He wouldn't collaborate with those they had already employed. Without alerting anyone, he stole money out of the budget in secret to pay his son Michael's wages. He even engaged in side business, obtaining free equipment for his side shop and trading dog food for his girlfriend's animal rescue initiative. Every action was concealed. All of the transactions were closed. More legal upheaval followed. He was found in contempt of court by a federal judge in 2019 for failing to pay JTM Motorsports $17,000. His 2009 Chevrolet Corvette ZR1 had been serviced by them. They were never paid by him. In addition, he owed $230.90 in overdue taxes to the municipality of Crawford, totaling $151,000. In addition, he owed $21,300 on his credit cards. And it didn't end there. There have been reports linking him to a purported scheme, Music, that defrauded investors in Central America of between $12 and $15 million. Everything has to do with his Florida OC Roadhouse project. Music, he packed everything and left New York by March 2020. The first store that made him famous was finished. He started anew with the OC Museum and Roadhouse after moving everything to Clearwater, Florida. Music, the brand remained well known. The bikes continued to make noise. However, the splendor had vanished. The funds had vanished. There was no longer any trust. Even at the age of 76, he continues to manufacture motorcycles and post on YouTube while holding handlebars and performing music, as if the past had never ended. Teutul, Paul Jr. A roaring empire once had Paul Teutul Jr. as its face. The world was astounded by the unique choppers he constructed for music. The Discovery Channel featured his creations. He and his father, Paul Sr., worked together to establish Orange County Choppers as a household name. However, celebrity came and went, and what began as a dream turned into a legal struggle, betrayal, and bankruptcy that all but destroyed his accomplishments. In 2008, at the height of American Chopper's success, everything started to fall apart. Paul Sr.'s outburst at his son was captured on camera. The dispute was not new. For years, they had been at odds over who actually made the decisions. However, it went, music, farther this time. On live television, Paul Sr. dismissed his son. Jr. was gone in an instant. No crew, no bikes, no office. But the corporation still had his name on it. His stake in Orange County Choppers was 20%. The actual conflict began there. Sr. didn't want anything to belong to his son. He activated a buyout provision that was hidden in their business contract, allowing him to evict Jr. entirely. Music, however, Sr.'s own appraiser declared the 20% to be worthless rather than fairly appraising it. Nothing. The kid who designed the bikes that made the company renowned and contributed to its growth was suddenly informed that his stake meant nothing at all. Jr. retaliated. By December 2010, he had won the appeal after going to court. The agreement was declared unenforceable by judges. Music. On how to determine the worth, they were never in agreement. Paul Jr. was able to maintain his interest in music, but the harm had already been done. The business had become a battlefield, and the family was shattered. They agreed to a short-term truce in 2009 in an attempt to save the Discovery Channel arrangement. However, the strain persisted. There was no longer any trust. Jr. then made a fresh start. He started Paul Jr., his own business. Designs, and relocated his business to Ship Bottom, New Jersey. He had music in his hands, his style, and his name, but he lacked the original team, the old garage, and the support of a reality show empire. Large brands called. He created unique helicopters for Mercedes-Benz, Cadillac, and Microsoft. People continued to pause and gaze at the bikes. However, financial difficulties began to surface behind the achievement. The data revealed the true picture by March 2018. Paul Jr. declared bankruptcy under Chapter 13. Although his obligations were almost as high, at $178.93 def, his assets were recorded at $180,01729s. In addition, he had $51,308 in unpaid taxes. Music, his $1.8 million estate in Montgomery, New York, was his greatest possession. However, that residence was insufficient to prevent the collapse of the entire situation. It collapsed slowly and painfully. The riches was gone, but the celebrity remained. Paul Jr. is still playing the game today. He attends upscale motorcycling events. He judges high-end concourse competitions. He is no longer a part of the empire he helped build, but he still builds bikes and makes music. Without him, Orange County Choppers continued on. His current net worth of only $2 million is a fraction of what it could have been. His bikes were displayed all around the world. A family garage became a worldwide brand thanks to him. And ultimately, the man who taught him everything lost his trust, the shop, and the name. The transition from television aristocracy to bankruptcy court only took 10 years. Nevertheless, he continued to build. Teutul Mikey. People watched American Chopper on television because of the wild clashes between Paul Sr. and Paul Jr., the roaring motors, and the custom, music, bikes. However, there was always someone who infused the mayhem with a breath of fresh air. Mikey Teutul was not a bike builder. He wasn't throwing wrenches or yelling. Music, he was cleaning up around the Orange County Choppers shop, answering phones, and making jokes. In a hard metal-based event, he was the weak link. However, Mikey's true struggle was not with his family, which is what most people didn't perceive in music. He was with himself. The bottle was involved. Almost like a background sound in his life, the drinking began subtly. However, that sound grew louder as the seasons changed. Mikey wasn't the only one impacted by his addiction. It destroyed everything in his world. Paul Sr., his father, had started the company from the beginning and was at his breaking point. This was no ordinary break. Mikey was expelled from Orange County Choppers by Paul Sr. The store, the performance, the family company. In one ruthless choice, it was all gone. Mikey started to vanish from episodes, which fans noticed. The buildings were not where he was. There was no background of him. People began to inquire about what was happening, but the reality was more sinister than anyone could have predicted. Music. At last, Mikey had fallen so far that he was forced to check himself into a recovery facility. He had to fight for his life or risk losing everything. After he sobered up, problems continued to follow him. A photographer named Scott Gunnels filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Orange County Choppers and Mikey Paul Sr. in 2019. Gunnels had photographed Mikey back in 2013. The identical images began to appear on goods, Facebook pages, music, and the program. Hoodies are $39.99 and t-shirts are $19.95. One of the pictures used for Mikey's art exhibition had his logo removed. He had not granted authorization. A federal judge made a decision in favor of Gunnels on February 18, 2020. For using the photos without permission, Paul Sr. was forced to pay $258, $48.45. For a family already scarred by years of emotional and legal harm, music, was a major hit. The financial issues didn't end there. For $550,000, Mikey purchased a home from Paula, his own mother, in 2004. It was in Montgomery, New York, and it was quiet. However, he had to sell that same house for only $460,000 in 2009, 5 years later. Music. His net worth, which was originally $2 million, gradually decreased to barely $1 million after he lost $90,000. Money wasn't the only factor. It involved observing his life dwindle in all musical directions. Notoriety was waning. His name was no longer associated with laughing or motorcycles. It was associated with silence, addiction, and lawsuits. Mikey continued to try, though. He started to pick himself up after going through rehab, going through court fights, and losing the family home. Music. He returned to Orange County Choppers as assistant general manager rather than as a star. He was in charge of the Facebook page. He kept things going. Although it was a little part, it remained consistent. In addition, he founded Fark Products LLC and started selling gourmet pasta sauces that he manufactured himself. It was no longer about being well known. Making music feel authentic was the goal. He established an art gallery in Montgomery. He stuffed it full of his own creations, paintings, and metal sculptures that communicated without making noise. Martino, Vinny D. Vinny D. Martino left Orange County Choppers in August 2007 after packing up his equipment. He, music, has worked there for 5 years, creating some of the most recognizable bikes in the history of the event. Fans admired his ability, calm demeanor, and crisp lines. However, Paul Teutul, Sr., looked directly into the camera as he gave in his notice and remarked, "Everyone's replaceable. No thanks, no handshake, no respect." It was a chilly statement that impacted Vinny more forcefully than any blow. He simply departed without arguing. He wasn't finished, though. He teamed up with another young OC builder, Cody Connolly. Together, they established V-Force Customs in New York's Rock Tavern. They wasted no time. Customers arrived, bikes were constructed, and the shop began, music, with a bang. Vinny returned to television in 2010, co-starring with Paul Jr. in American Chopper, Senior vs. Junior. He made appearances in 55 of the 65 episodes of the show. Music. It seemed like everything was finally falling into place for 4 seasons. It felt like a true dream. However, the outside world was rapidly evolving. The crash then occurred. Banks and stock, music, markets weren't the only things affected by the 2008 financial crisis. The world of custom motorcycles was destroyed. The market for customized choppers has disappeared by the end of 2013. No one was purchasing. Shows and stores were no longer supported by the culture. The quality of Vinny's work was irrelevant. No buyers remained. The losses mounted. V-Force Customs was unable to endure. Vinny sold the equipment on which he had based his ambition, one by one. Gone are the paint guns, lathes, and welders, music. Quietly, he closed the shop. No send-off, no attention. Only the shuffling of doors and the folding of hopes. Vinny made a terrible turn the same year. Using his remaining resources, he founded DiMartino Motorsports in Montgomery. It had nothing to do with cable TV or fancy motorcycles this time. Keeping the lights on was the goal. Music, he now fixes vehicles and light trucks, music, for locals instead of creating custom choppers for the world. Grease, tools, and honest labor are the only things in the garage. There are no cameras or fans hanging over the ropes. His current estimated net worth in the music industry is approximately $1 million. That number may appear insignificant to someone who used to work under the bright lights of a popular reality program, but he constructed it all by himself, without the use of scripts or shortcuts. When Vinny stepped out in 2007, he demonstrated something: music. He didn't require the blessing of Paul Sr. He survived without celebrity. All he needed was enough self-confidence to begin over. And he managed to continue making songs even after everything collapsed. Petco, Rick. Rick Petco drove 90 minutes to work every day for 13 years after waking up in Pennsylvania. He then turned around and performed the music once more at the end of each day. That equates to spending 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, locked in traffic between taillights and trucks in order to get to the loudest store on TV. From July 2003 to Music, 2016, Rick maintained that pattern like a well-oiled machine. Rick continued to manufacture bikes and show up in silence as the Teutuls at Orange County choppers yelled across the floor, broke furniture, and tossed wrenches. The road was eating away at his life, but no one on screen saw it. He received a good salary for it. In addition to his usual OCC salary, Rick received $13,000 each time he featured on an episode. The checks totaled up. His net worth had increased to almost $1.75 million by the time he left. However, there was a price for all that money that was hidden from view. The store was in disarray. The cameras didn't stop. Rick was spending more time behind the wheel than with his own wife, and the fights were genuine. Everything changed in 2012 when he got married. He began to realize how much of his life was being sucked out: the hours spent driving, the energy lost listening to Junior and Senior yell about frames, deadlines, and loyalty. He was famous because of the show. Although it had brought him wealth, it had not brought him joy. In 2016, Rick took a step that most people talk about but seldom actually take. He turned to leave. TV cameras are out. No more perks for each episode. No more spending an hour and a half driving only to enter a shouting storm. Rick moved home after packing up his tools. Not only to Pennsylvania, but also in the vicinity. His new employment, music, was just a few minutes away this time. The commute didn't kill him when he joined Stroudsburg's Pocono Mountain Harley-Davidson. He was honest with the Pocono record. While it was fantastic for the time being, it wasn't the essence of who I was. He now operates out of his own farmstead. He established a company called RPD & Co-Otters, where he makes wedding bands and personalized knives by hand. He goes to motorbike shows with his spouse and children. Once more, he uses his hands to create without yelling, cameras, or drama. Connolly, Cody. When Cody Connolly first entered the Orange County choppers world, he was only 14 years old. In 2001, the majority of children his age were still working on their schoolwork. However, Cody was already using welding equipment and watching the Teutul family on national TV to learn. He was more than simply a background kid. He became one of the youngest and most talented bike fabricators anyone had ever seen on film, and viewers watched him develop year after year. He even received the Cody Project, a unique build, in Season 1. Nor was it merely for show. In 2003, that bike was auctioned during Daytona Beach Bike Week. And for a while, music, Cody looked to have it all. In order to further develop his music abilities, Paul Teutul Sr. even covered the cost of his attendance at the American Motorcycle Institute. Everything appeared to be a dream at first glance. However, the truth quickly came to light. Music, Cody left in October 2007. The break wasn't silent, even though he was only 20. Everyone who ever seen the show was startled when he filed a lawsuit against Orange County choppers and music, Paul Sr. Everyone's favorite child was now suing the man who had once considered him a member of his family. Even after he departed, Cody said, his face was still used on goods. They never gave him any money for the coloring books, posters, and other equipment. Not even the money was the most agonizing aspect. On camera, Paul Sr. gave Cody the keys to a bespoke helicopter and said it was his. According to Cody, he never received that bike. The keys were not for real life, but for the audience. He requested damages of $250,000. Cody said that he was unaware of his rights at the time when others questioned why he waited so long. He was a young man. The dispute stretched on until 2011, at which point it was discreetly resolved out of court. No public apologies, no spectacular conclusion, just quiet. Music. After that, Cody completely vanished from the motorbike world. He was no longer a part of the same industry that made him famous on TV. He made a fresh start. Pine Bush, New York-based Revel Ranch Excavation is a demolition business. He deals with drainage, land clearance, septic systems, and dirt. He is now married. He has a daughter. He hardly ever uses social media to post. The boy who used to weld petrol tanks on camera, music, now excavates far from the spotlight. Jason Pohl. Next was Jason Paul, a designer who started working at OC in early 2004. He was merely an artist creating digital choppers for a pinball game before to the presentation. However, after viewing his work, Paul Sr. appointed him as the senior designer. Jason's designs initially astounded everyone. He brought futuristic-looking tech abilities and bold ideas. However, he was not well liked by the internet. They actually detested him. Viewers referred to him as conceited. He was accused by fans of defending music himself by spamming chat boards. According to one writer, Jason was the most despised person on American Chopper and most likely knew it. His illustrations were frequently criticized for not resembling authentic motorcycles. Paul Sr. had to constantly remind him that a sketch had to develop into something that could be written. When Paul Sr. lost it over one of Jason's builds and labeled it a cake decorator, it was the most vicious moment in the Senior versus Junior spin-off. Jason sobbed on camera. He, Music, claimed that he took the designs personally and was devastated to see the business owner disparage his creations in public. Music, during the 2011 build-off between Jesse James and OC Paul Jr. Jason contributed to the design of an odd bike with flamethrowers that resembled a tank. It didn't work out. The internet chuckled. Bikers with a strong passion rolled their eyes. Critics claimed that rather than resembling a motorbike, it resembled a fantasy from a video game. And that joke remained with Jason. As of February 2018, OC was in disarray. Paul Sr. declared bankruptcy under Chapter 13. He was being pursued by 8 lawsuits and owed more than $66,000 in credit card debt. After then, Jason's on-screen time quickly decreased. He formally departed in March, Music, 2020. In 2021, he relocated to Florida and never looked back. He currently serves as a brand ambassador for SolidWorks. He creates stuff far away from TV cameras and bike shops. He is thought to have a net worth of about $700,000. Just 3D models, software, and peace, no more shouting, no more flames. Hansford, Nick. Nick Hansford was quietly assembling bikes and maintaining his composure while the rest of the Orange County Choppers group raged on video and sobbed in court. He had trained with Christian Welter at the American Motorcycle Institute in Florida, and both of them had aspirations that went beyond the shops they worked in. Although Nick's early work at Daytona Choppers and Pompano Fats helped him develop his skills, Bike Week in 2000 was a game-changer. There, he met Paul Teutul, Sr., who brought Nick on board at OC as a distributor and technician after noticing his quiet confidence in music. Nick relocated to New York for family reasons 2 years later, in 2002, after leaving Florida. The remainder of his life was altered by that choice. For 17 years in a row, he worked as a full-time mechanic at the OC shop. Up until 2019, he frequently appeared on Orange County Choppers and American Chopper. Nick kept his head down and simply worked as others yelled at one another in court or on screen. He avoided the drama, the bankruptcies, the litigation, and the feuds. He never rose to fame, but he developed into something better and more reliable. He currently resides in Virginia with his wife and at least 2 children, but nobody is really sure what he does these days. He does not publish, he does not say. He just chose to disappear from the public eye. Christian Welter. Though it had its own music twist, Christian Welter's story was equally steady. He was born in New Jersey on September 9, 1978. He lived alongside Nick Hansford in a dorm at the American Motorcycle Institute as well. Everything would start with that one flatmate link. Christian initially appeared on OC in the inaugural season in 2002. He was not ostentatious or boisterous. He didn't start arguments. He simply worked. He oversaw the wiring, the music, assembly, and the majority of the technical work on each custom helicopter that left the shop in his capacity as head mechanic and shop foreman. Christian was in the back ensuring that the bikes actually ran while Junior was running off and Paul Sr. was shouting. Every public calamity that followed the rest of the team, he stayed away from music. Christian wasn't involved when Paul Sr. declared bankruptcy in 2018 due to monthly spending exceeding $12,600. He had continued to work. He had maintained order. He had been taking private drum tuition for 7 years, having begun at the age of 12. They started a band once Steve Morrow, OC's general manager, learnt about it. They even put out a 10-song record after rehearsing in the boiler room. Christian claimed that although it was hurried and never truly demonstrated their capabilities, it did occur. He remained at OC until 2016 before discreetly leaving. Years of consistent labor and quiet departures without litigation, headlines, or meltdowns. Teutul Daniel. What happened to him nearly destroyed the entire empire, even though he wasn't on the show and didn't get involved in the battles like music, Paul Jr. or the public flames like Paul Sr. Daniel was the second oldest son of Paul Sr. Additionally, he assumed control of OC Ironworks, the family's original company, in 2004. Although it appeared to be a gift, there was more going on behind the scenes. Tom Geneva, a trustee in bankruptcy, filed a startling complaint in 2007. He charged Daniel and his family with stealing everything that was important from OC Ironworks, including accounts, employees, and machinery, and transferring it to a new business called Orange County Ironworks LLC without paying the full value. The previous business failed. Nothing was obtained by the creditors. It was more than just careless behavior. Fraud was alleged. Daniel was only 32 years old and faced a hefty fine when everything was said and done in December 2008. He was mandated to make a $500,000 payment. Paul Jr. and Paul Sr. were only required to pay $50,000 apiece. Their penalty was 10 times as much as Daniel's. The majority of Americans were making roughly $40,000 annually at the time. This was a wrecking ball, not just a fine. Daniel, however, did not fold. He didn't cry on television. He didn't declare bankruptcy. He returned to his work, music. He worked for years to improve the company's name and expand its operations. He founded Gabriel Steel, a second business. He increased the number of workers from 35 to 69 by 2024. Surprisingly, he was the one who constructed the enormous OC headquarters, music, the same building that brought his brothers fame on TV. He never received recognition for it. Music, he was never the brand's spokesperson. However, he had literally contributed to its construction behind the scenes. Daniel transformed a $500,000 scandal into one of New York's most successful steel companies, while his brothers fought in front of cameras and lost millions.